Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Creating the Ultimate B2B Experience. I'm your moderator, Zoe Fernandez from Merkle's marketing team. Before we get to the webinar content, I'd like to share some key housekeeping items for you to keep in mind throughout today's presentation. The webinar console you are looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows you have open. Please ask questions throughout the webinar, as we'd love to hear from you. To ask a question, please either submit them by clicking on the Q&A icon on your screen, entering your question and hitting send, or tweeting them to us using @Merkle and #MerkleWebinar. If we do not get to your question today, our speakers will email you a response. And if you'd like to revisit today's webinar, a recorded version will be sent to you in the coming days. And lastly, resources related to this webinar can be found at the bottom of your screen. Please take a look to learn more. Now I'm going to hand over to Michael McLaren to get us started and introduce today's speakers.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. It's great to see everyone on the line and looking forward to a good session. I'm joined by a number of my esteemed colleagues in our group. You may have heard that we launched a B2B dedicated business unit, and part of which is two agencies, Gyro, one of the leading B2B creative agencies, and B2B International, one of the, if not the leading, B2B dedicated research company. And we're here to share insights and findings from a piece of research that we're pretty excited about around the underlying drivers of B2B decision-making and what are the kind of characteristics or superpowers that leading B2B brands are mastering as they're engaging with today's B2B buyer. We will be joined by Oliver Truman, who's the head of research and analytics at B2B International, Simon Calvert, the chief strategy officer of Gyro, and Nick Haig, who heads up B2B International and leads the growth initiatives. As Zoe mentioned, I'm Michael McLaren, and I'm the chief executive of Merkle B2B, which is the group that I mentioned. So we'll quickly take a look at what's going on in the marketplace and level set the current environment. It's a very dynamic environment that I'm sure that you're all navigating. We'll talk about the research itself, the methodology, the sample size, the regional footprint. We'll take you through the headlines. We'll take you through some of the key insights. And then we'll talk about, an engagement model looking ahead beyond today. But I just want to quickly set the stage for the current B2B environment. It's not lost on anyone here, I'm sure, that the consumerization of B2B is a very real phenomenon. In other words, the B2B buyer is bringing expectations of great experiences with them into their B2B professional transactions that are being informed by their experiences as consumers. So, whether it's something that's more convenient, whether it's things that are more relevant, whether it's things that are more personal and personalized. So, increasingly the expectation from our buyer is that we are going to create world-class experiences for them, experiences that are more geared to them in the business they're in the role that they're in, and obviously this puts a challenge on brands to effectively engage and communicate. We're wrestling with an endless sea of complexity. Everything from, an exploding marketing technology landscape, a rapidly expanding set of marketing clouds and integration of those cloud capabilities into our core technology structure, an explosion of data from third-party sources, second-party sources, and the management of first-party data. And trying to stay at the forefront of making sure we can make smart bets, integrate core technologies, effectively leverage data is a challenge that every marketer is wrestling with. We also can't write endless checks. We don't have bottomless resources. And if anything, our resources over the last 12 months have been increasingly constrained, if not cut back. So we're being asked to do more with less. and we need to find ways to succeed with limited resources. So this is very much forefront in our minds as we thought about this piece of research. And then finally, there's no silver bullets, and we're the first, people to tell you that every B2B brand is a collection of the impressions and the sort of emotional equity that's been built up over, long periods of time. They're also a function of these moments of truth, the key touch points with customers that matter most, and how those moments of truth are manifested. And brands either deliver in these moments and create that kind of delighting experience, or they tend to fall by the wayside. And what we know about some of these audiences is they're increasingly demanding, and they're increasingly quick to change preference to go to another brand if they don't feel like the brand is serving them in a manner they want to be served. So it's never been a more important time. So at Merkle B2B, we truly think of ourselves as architects of the ultimate B2B customer experience. And this means that we need to get inside the mindset of our audience, to really walk a mile in their shoes, to understand how they engage in the buying process, to understand the stakeholders in their organization and the varying levels of influence that they have at different points in time, and help clients navigate this increasingly complex and challenging environment, and pull together as many insights and sort of audience knowledge as we can, so that we can make smart recommendations and help build the ultimate customer journey through those ultimate customer experiences. So I'll jump into the research, and I'm going to hand over to Oliver, and he'll tell us about the key ingredients in creating the ultimate B2B customer experience. Thank you, Oliver.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you again to everybody who's been able to join us today. So I'm Oliver. I'm the head of research and analytics at B2B International, and I was the lead on the research, the primary research that we have created as part of this initiative, and which we'll be sharing with you today. So a few words initially just in terms of the program that we've created, the background to it, and also the level of depth, as Michael has already said, that we have at our disposal here. Just a bit of potted history about this research program. It was only last year that we as B2B International launched the State of B2B study. This was an insight initiative that we hoped to try and build upon to try and understand the changing dynamics of B2B decision making. And from that study, we discovered that the role of emotions was increasingly important, not just the rational factors in decision making that were often thought to be the be-all and end-all of B2B markets. But for this year's study, we wanted to go a level of depth further into much greater detail about what it was that makes a difference, not just across the purchase journey, but actually once somebody is acquired and becomes a customer, with this ultimate ambition in mind, this idea of building the ultimate customer experience. And we worked with our colleagues at Gyro to design a very comprehensive research program to try and help solve some of that big conundrum, some of those big challenges that we've just introduced to you. And this year's study, I have to say, is probably one of the most comprehensive ones of this type that we've ever done. We interviewed over 3,000 B2B decision makers and product users globally. We covered that research across 7 different countries, actually more than 7 countries, 9 different countries, 3 different continents. And as part of those interviews, we wanted people to recount a recent B2B purchasing or customer experience that they'd had. So although it was 3,000 interviews that we conducted, over 5,000 data points were collected about some of the largest business-to-business brands that there are in the world. And we focused our investigation in 4 high-level categories. We wanted to understand a little bit about financial services, so this included banking, payment processing, credit and leasing services, all classic B2B financial services offerings. Professional services, so this is your classic legal accounting, advisory type services. Technology, which included software, telecoms, hardware and cloud services. And then finally, what you might think of as being a bit more of the smokestack side of B2B. So this is manufactured goods, raw materials, engineered components, those sorts of things that go into very complex value chains. And I hope what we'll be able to share with you today is that the level and depth of the data that we have collected has allowed us to gain a real unique perspective on some of the drivers of unique B2B customer experiences. Now, in order to design the study, we needed at the outset to try and work with what we thought to be some of the ways in which brands could make a meaningful difference to B2B buyers and B2B users of products and services. And so, again, we worked with our colleagues at Gyro to come up with a list of all of the different things that we thought could make a meaningful difference. So this that you can see here is not an oversized advent calendar or anything of that sort, but rather it is the long list without all of the words attached to them of those factors that we thought could make a difference. And this was a product, not just on the one hand of the many research projects that we've done over the years and the many client engagements that Gyro has had, but also a literature review, a review of all of the material that's out there related to the B2B purchasing experience. So we came up with this list of 45 different issues, and you will see the range of different things that this encapsulates as part of the B2B customer experience. It goes from quite prosaic issues on the left-hand side, so this is things like the compliance with regulations, whether or not the organization's products and services are able to meet minimum functional requirements, through to slightly more interesting things as we perhaps cast our eyes towards the right-hand side of the chart here. So feeling safe in signing a contract with a particular provider, making an individual's life at work more interesting or enjoyable, and importantly, and a word that's bandied around an awful lot nowadays, the idea that a B2B brand is an active thought leader in its category. Now, we came up with this list of 45 different issues, but realized very, very soon that this was going to be slightly too long and unwieldy for us to build into a framework, certainly not a framework that could be used by our clients and by the market more generally. So we conducted a pre-test to try and reduce that list down. And in the end, we boiled it down to 30 different ways that we thought B2B brands could make that meaningful difference to buyers and customers along their customer journeys. And so that we don't overwhelm ourselves, I guess, today, what we wanted to try and do was to not show you all of the issues that are part of this list of ways of making a meaningful difference. So some of the numbers that you see here will be referred back to later on in the presentation, but in some of the subsequent pieces that we'll be releasing from this, we will be sharing with you much more that lies behind this framework. So these were the most important ones, the 30 ways of making a meaningful difference that we will be reviewing in more detail later on. Now, as part of the questions that we asked, we wanted, as I mentioned, to get people to think about a recent purchase experience that they'd been through within a B2B market. So one of the 4 categories that I mentioned a few moments ago. And so what we've got here is a classic or idealized purchase journey process. There's nothing new or particularly radical here, but importantly, it is at least a journey or a process that can be abstracted to apply to pretty much any B2B category, certainly the categories that we looked at. So in the first instance, look at the extent to which people make a shortlist or a competitive set. We then look at the processes that people may follow in terms of engaging with and speaking with and approaching brands until such a point in the process that a winner emerges and is chosen. And then after that point, we were just as interested in the extent to which an organization or a brand would be worked with again. So the extent to which there would be repurchase and hopefully, one hopes, some upselling through to other products and services that a brand may have to offer. And what we asked people to do was to score brands that they had engaged with throughout that process. So not just the winning brands, but also the brands that had fallen out of the process at some point or other, including, very importantly, those brands that effectively are known, they're at the top of the funnel, but which are dismissed out of hand even before the most cursory level of research is conducted. And by collecting information about brands at all different parts of the process and scoring them against the 30 ways in which people can add value and ways in which B2B brands can add value, we can start to understand some of the calculus of what makes a difference. So lying behind all of the work that you will see today is an awful lot of advanced statistical analysis using regression and other techniques to look at each of these steps of the process and to work out what makes a difference between the winning brands and between those brands that perhaps miss out. Now, before I hand over, it's perhaps worth just dwelling on a few general points, a few general insights that we collected as part of our investigations, particularly those that are linked to key dropout points along the journey. So what we found was that many organizations, for many B2B decision makers, there were brands that they knew about, brands that were in effect mentally available to them, but which dropped out of the process before any research or shortlisting took place. Indeed, 56% of all of the organizations that we spoke to, individuals that we spoke to, were able to readily recall a brand that they would actually reject outright, and which doesn't even get to the point of being researched further. They don't get to the point of landing on the vendor's website, looking at further information, and so on. Even then, for brands that do make it to the consideration part of the process, there's a huge amount of leakage, and particularly leakage that happens in the process prior to the point of a brand being approached for a tender or a quote or even some serious pricing. 62% indeed of all of the brands that are considered don't even make it to that point. And then finally, we know from a lot of the client engagements that we have right now, many of the organizations that we work with are looking to get more out of their existing client bases, whether that's in terms of cross or upsell. And with that particular objective in mind, we thought it made sense to see whether brands are succeeding in that. And we are sad to report, unfortunately, that a great many experiences lack in this respect. Indeed, it's only 56% of cases where an individual buyer would intend to extend their use of an existing brand or spend more with that brand for perhaps some other requirements, whether that's within the category or straying slightly outside of the category. So the process here is brutal. There's no doubt about it, and there's an awful lot of optimization to be done, and all the more reason for us to look at this topic in more detail. And I'll be handing across now to Simon, who'll be walking you through some of these ways of making a difference and the ways in which we can hopefully help brands to construct the ultimate B2B customer experience.
Thank you, Oliver. So I'm going to take you forward to the next two sections. The first section is going to be about pulling out some of the key headlines, what we discovered. And then the second section is going to be about talking about some of the differences. Clearly, with a data set like this, what you're able to do is cut it in lots of different ways. So the first thing to bear in mind, and it sounds stunningly simple, but the research bears this out, is that there are two core areas to concentrate on. And there's been a lot of coverage about this over several years now in terms of how we should humanize things more. The reality is that this research shows that we're still very much driven by focusing at a company level benefit, not a buyer level benefit. So what we need to still keep thinking about, at the risk of banging the drum, is not only how do we make a meaningful difference to the company and what the company's trying to achieve, but also to the buyers and the decision-making unit that are involved on that particular journey. And what the research also showed is that there are a number of broad needs and wants that operate at a company level across the top there and at a buyer level. And there are four superpowers which kind of come through, which are kind of the big thoughts that we need to kind of bear in mind as we travel through thinking about how we can create the ultimate B2B customer experience. The first superpower we called reliability. And that's very much about kind of the concept of trust. Do you fulfill basic requirements so your customers view your brand as trustworthy and reliable? And sitting within this were 10 of the ingredients that Oliver referred to earlier on. The second superpower we identified was the kind of concept of understanding. Do you actually demonstrate that you get the company's needs? Do you provide tailored and adaptable approaches that make it clear that you're aligned with your customer's company? Both of these are well understood and are well-trodden routes. And this one has 8 ingredients within it. On the right-hand side is the area where there's a lot more opportunity for improvement. Here we have what we call the enrichment superpower, and this focuses in on making an individual's life better, their work life. And it looks at how a customer experience directly benefits the individual decision-making unit by providing a connection that helps them improve professionally and personally. And then the final superpower that we identified is what we call preeminence. The idea that increasingly people are buying brands based on the fact that they're proud to be associated with them. So is your brand positioned as sophisticated, modern, and a leader within your field, one that buyers will be proud to work with? Oliver referred to 30 ingredients, the specific ways that this can be done, the specific ways that these can be written through the ultimate B2B customer experience. We have 18 of those ingredients on the right-hand side in terms of the company level, and we have 12 of those on the buyer side in terms of making a meaningful difference to what the buyer experiences. So to go down a level further, what we've done here is we've taken the superpowers and we run them down the left-hand side. So you have reliability, understanding, enrichment, and preeminence. The top two, making a difference to the company. The second two, making a difference to the buyer. And running down the middle there, you have the individual ingredients that we want to pull out and have a further think about. What happened in the process of the research is that they were mapped over time in terms of a decision-making journey. And we've chosen these 6 because they're deemed to be particularly important for one very simple reason. And that is that they make a meaningful difference at every single stage of the journey that the buyers that we interviewed went on. So at the top level, you have some of those ones around reliability, meeting a minimum quality standards, being competitively priced, complying with regulations, and taking steps to mitigate risks. And at the bottom there, you have ones which are very buyer-focused. Are you an active thought leader in the category and sector? And do you have a clear vision of and actively work towards filling obligations to society? Now, one of the things that was interesting about the research was we asked people to actually comment on how successfully they thought brands actually achieved those particular ingredients. And what you can see here is that based on green being strong, orange being average, and red being poor, we have those basic requirements done well. It's a moot point about price because people can always criticize price. But actually, given how much coverage there has been in the past years about generating thought leadership programs, but also brand purpose, it was quite disappointing to see that on average across the journey, in terms of those ingredients that buyers expected to be seen in the experience that they were being taken through, only average performances were recorded with the brands that we actually encountered. So first conclusion here, there's a lot more work to do in terms of how we really drive thought leadership and how we really fulfill meaningful brand purpose. If we dig in a bit more, there were 8 other ingredients we wanted to pull out. Bearing in mind, we've left some on the side for the sake of simplicity today. Here we have the understanding superpower on the left there. 4 ingredients. Provide the support and information, have a smoothly integrated offering, be approachable and transparent, and products and services can be customized. Moving down, we have 4 more ingredients that are worth pulling out. Those are make it easy to recommend and endorse people's products and services, make someone feel safe signing a contract with you, help keep them up to date and make them more employable, and make my workday a little more interesting and entertaining. What's interesting about these is these perform a significant role in the middle of the journey. And actually, what's really interesting about these is in terms of moving a brand from quote through proposal and then getting chosen, 5 are really important. Have a smoothly integrated offering, be approachable and transparent, make it easy to sell on, help people feel safe signing a contract, and importantly, but often missed, make my workday a little more fun, a little more entertaining, a little more human. So what you have here is you essentially have a model that helps us understand how we can architect those ingredients and actually produce the ultimate B2B customer experience. What we've got here is we've got also another slightly damning indictment, which is the fact that all these brands that we interviewed and discussed and got people to have a think about actually don't do particularly well. Red is where they're poor experience, and orange is actually where the experience is average. So here you can see, even in those critical moments of the journey, particularly in terms of moving people from quote to proposal and then on to being chosen, those ingredients that were deemed to be important are still not particularly well served. So from a buyer point of view, we've still got a lot more work to do in terms of the experiences we create. So what I've talked to you about is the overall headlines that we have observed, things that are true across the entire B2B category. But the more interesting thing is actually to go down a level and to actually look at some of the differences. So differences we're going to have a look at. If you cut the data by audiences, what does it mean? If you cut by size of business, if you cut by industries, and if you cut by brands, what does that mean? Here we have the superpowers presented across the top. So reliability, understanding, enrichment, and preeminence. And down the left-hand side, we cut the data by different size of business. Running through the middle, what you have is you have the individual ingredients. And what you can see here is there are clearly some differences between what SMEs deem to be important within the ultimate B2B customer experience and what enterprises deem to be important. The first thing to look at is the shape. Reliability, generally well covered. But actually, from a SME point of view, a massive requirement for more of the ingredients that relate to understanding their company's needs. And in terms of enrichment, more of a need to have ingredients which actually help people make their work life a little bit better. Whereas when you move up to the enterprise level, very different indeed in terms of not necessarily the reliability end of the spectrum, but much more demand for things like, for example, preeminence. So things like, for example, thought leadership, clarity around your social purpose, and clarity around general innovation. So clear differences that we're able to see in terms of the kind of experiences that people are actually having and the kinds of different things that different sized businesses value within the ultimate B2B customer experience. If we move on to the next one, here we have differences by audiences. Again, across the top, we have the individual superpowers. Down the left-hand side, we have different generations. Again, if we have a look at that, we can see very different patterns in terms of what millennials need versus Gen X versus boomers. What I'd encourage you to do is have a look at the difference between millennials and boomers. What's interesting about this is on those particular journeys where we interviewed millennials, they were much more interested in ingredients within the customer experience that focused on the reliability space and understanding. Whereas those boomers were much less about that, and they were much more interested in things like, for example, preeminence. Is this a brand I really want to work with? Is this a brand I really want to be associated with? If we move on one, then it's also possible to cut the data by different kinds of industry. So here we have the superpowers down the left-hand side. We have the different sectors across the top. And the thing to notice here is that actually the blue triangles indicate the number of ingredients that were chosen and deemed to be important on the journey, i.e. significant on the journey, at each particular superpower. If you look at manufacturing and you look at professional services, their ingredients were pretty evenly spread in terms of importance. So the importance of reliability, understanding, enrichment, and preeminence were pretty consistent across the board. Whereas it appears that the technology category, the financial services category, far more similar, placed far greater emphasis on the importance of reliability and far more importance on the things like, for example, demonstrating you can meaningfully understand what the company needs. If we then take this a step further, we also looked at the individual categories and we mapped it over the journey. And here, this is by no means supposed to be comprehensive in terms of the role each of these superpowers plays. But if you drop your eye down towards manufacturing, you can see some very clear differences between the importance of enrichment from manufacturing right at the front end of the journey versus where enrichment plays a critical role further down the process from tender quote through to chosen for categories like technology, financial services, and professional services. So clear differences in terms of what people think are important at different stages of the journey. Preeminence, another good example of manufacturing, plays a role earlier in the journey, whereas preeminence plays a role in financial services towards the repeat purchase process. And then finally, one that's also worth calling out is professional services, where actually the understanding superpower plays a significant role right at the beginning of the process. So the key thing to take away from this is actually, while these superpowers are different by industry, they also play different roles at different points on the journey. Within the research, we also asked people to actually name the brand that they were talking about, so the purchase process they revisited. And what we're able to show here is some of the brands that came out particularly well. We've obviously spared the ones that didn't do so well, but what you've got here is you've got examples in the technology category, the financial services category, the manufacturing category, and professional services category of brands that scored very well across each 4 of the superpowers. And even though we featured HP, Starling, Cat, and KMG, they still did very well in terms of their performance, with only a couple of superpowers being orange. But nevertheless, opportunities for improvement once you dig into the detail about what it really means for them. So, what does this mean for how we're starting to work with clients? Well, what it allows us to do is to focus on the differences between how the client's performing and how the category's performing, and help our clients better understand how they should deploy their resources. So here we have in the middle some of the key ingredients. Here we have on the far right the example of what I've called brand Z, and then we have the category. And it gives you a number of strategic options to work with. The first is the top level one, which is brand Z clearly outperforms the category in things like, for example, providing support, services that can be customized, making it easy to recommend, and actually having a clear vision and working towards it in terms of fulfilling their obligation to society. This is where the brand outperforms the category based on the ultimate B2B customer experience. Should they leverage that for commercial benefit? At the bottom, the story for brand Z is less good. Here you can see that there's a lot of reds and oranges, whereas the category is mainly orange and green. So things like, for example, do they offer enough variety and choice? And do people actually feel safe signing a contract with them are real issues for this brand versus the category. So here we're starting to work with clients where we're looking in terms of how the category performs, how their brand performs, and where they might want to focus their energy and efforts in terms of creating the ultimate B2B brand experience. There is one final level which this actually works with. And here you've got the situation where the brand actually matches the category in terms of evaluation of its performance in these key areas. If you come up one from the bottom, it matches the category, but everything's green. So maybe there's no point in trying to improve those. But if I come up the next level, the brand clearly matches the category, but the category generally doesn't do brilliantly. So there are clear opportunities strategically to go after an experience that does something around reframing the concept of price, for example. Thinking about how we actually can be more approachable and transparent, thinking about how we can actually keep potential buyers up to date and make them more employable in terms of the experience we offer, how we can actually add a bit more interest into their lives. Or should we revisit our thought leadership program and think about how we reboot that? Because at the moment, in comparison to the category, not performing exactly the same as the category, but the category is actually not out there setting the standard, the benchmark. So what we basically now have is we have a data set that allows us to understand the key ingredients of what it takes to create the ultimate B2B customer experience. That is mapped across a number of different categories, and there's a number of different brands that we can actually compare and contrast with and make very clear recommendations about what they should achieve based on where they should focus their energies and efforts. So what I'm now going to do is hand over to Nick, who's going to talk about what happens with this beyond today.
Thanks, Simon. So, what have we learned? Well, we've had to cover a lot of ground very quickly in order to get the main story across today. But hopefully, the key takeaway for you all is that what we've been able to show is, really robust piece of research here, and there's these 4 overarching superpowers that make a difference to the buyer experience. We've got the 2 superpowers that impact on what people want at a company level, and as to be expected, I suppose, reliability, the trust in being able to deliver against what that brand promise is, but also the understanding. Do they understand my company needs specifically, and are they able to meet those? And then there's the other 2 superpowers that impact on what individuals want specific to them. There's the enrichment side of things, makes my work life better, but there's also this preeminence, the fact that they want to be proud to work alongside or choose the brand that they want to work with. Point number 2, we've shared with you just some of the 30 ingredients that make up this intricate touch points in a customer's journey. And we've seen that some elements play a role across the whole buyer journey, including what was interesting for me, at least, being a thought leader in a sector and working towards having a wider impact on society, these two particular ingredients, not just important at the upfront awareness part of the journey, but at the upsell and the resell part of the journey too. I think what we've also seen is that some of these ingredients being competitively priced is important. Of course it is. It's got to be in the buyer's frame set, but that buyers don't seem to be seeing the value in the products and services that brands are delivering. So definitely a big opportunity for brands to showcase how they deliver value to the market. Point number 3, well, we've always known that buyers' needs differ. That's marketing, that's segmentation, depending on also differences in age, sector, and company size. And what this research has given us is the ability to mine the data and show evidence of where the experience differs across the journey, which obviously allows you as managers of the brand to develop new propositions, messages, ways of working in those moments that matter across the journey, depending on who you want to target and in which particular sector you might play. Point number 4, hopefully we've given you this flavour of the robustness of the research and the fact that we have this large data bank of answers that can show which levers to pull and make a difference to B2B buyers. We've measured over 5,000 B2B brand experiences across 4 sectors, which allows for nice brand comparisons at a category level. And finally, Simon's just talked us through point number 5 there and showing how we can create action on the back of this research for your brand by carrying out a survey to get a feel for how your brand compares to the sector you play in. And this gives you the opportunity to know either where you need to change the service levels and experience you currently deliver, but also what white space opportunities there are to step change and really start to make a differentiating impact in the category as well. In terms of what we've got today, then hopefully everything's clear. There is this wealth of information that's come out of this study, and we have only just scratched the surface, both in the published paper that we launched a couple of weeks ago, but also in talking it with you today. And in terms of digging deeper, well, there's definitely sector-specific findings as well as generational differences by age. Following today, we'll send you all a recording of this session. And if you're interested in learning more about your particular sector, then we will be running sector-specific webinars in February next year. And there'll be links in the emails that we send through where you can actually sign up and have a look at those. But equally, if you are interested in some of these differences in how millennials differ to Gen X and baby boomers, then we do have a separate paper and a corresponding webinar that will be going live within the new year. So definitely keep your eyes open for that one. I know we've moved at pace today in order to get through the full story. I have seen questions coming in during the session. So if you haven't asked questions, then this is your opportunity to put them in the Q&A box if you haven't done so already. So I've got a few questions as well that have come up since while everyone's been talking. So maybe Michael, I'll start with yourself. And I think it goes back to one of those points up front with only just half of respondents stating that they intend to extend their use of other services from brands they've already made this decision to do business with. And it feels like a massive lost opportunity that brands are missing out on. What's your take on this? Do you think it's down to ignorance or of the services that they offer, the wider portfolio, or do you think it's something more than that?
I mean, I think it's a combination of factors, but we know from the research that customers are changing their consideration set faster than before. They're moving to brands that are more aligned with them, both in terms of their expectations, but also in terms of their values. And so a lot of these markers on, how does this brand help me reach preeminence, achieve preeminence? How does this brand make an impact, help me make an impact, a personal impact? I think those considerations are really important. One observation is we think that a lot of B2B marketing has become very mid-funnel, lower funnel, very transactional, very optimized, very sort of, transaction-based. And in the absence of an emotional connection with a brand, a customer is going to be, I think, a little more fickle in terms of not taking other brands into consideration. So that's another area. I think there's a huge opportunity to build stronger emotional connections with audiences.
Yeah. Here's a question from Anne. Anne, thanks for sending this through. It's probably, I'll direct this at yourself, Simon, because it's part of one of the ingredients or relating back to the superpowers. But she said, can you please give me an example of what makes my life better, or how it makes my life easier is aligned to the superpowers?
Yeah, there were 6 that fell into that particular area, and there were 4 that we talked about today. 2 are quite functional. So one is making easy to sell a recommendation on within an organization, i.e. your product or service. How do you sell it up, down, or across the line? The second one was actually just giving people a sense of confidence and security around signing with you as a company. There were 2 we haven't talked about today, but the other 2 we talked about today was actually the idea of working with a brand actually keeps you up to date and makes you more employable. There's quite a lot of examples these days of people wanting to work with brands because actually it's good from their long-term career development to go somewhere else and say, I've worked with a particular service or supplier. And then the final one was really interesting from our point of view. And again, I think we called it out today, which was all about making someone's workday a little more fun, a little more entertaining, kind of the more human side of it, which most verticals did particularly poorly at. So those are 4 of the 6 examples of how you can actually make someone's work life a bit better.
Actually, another question that's relating to that, actually, and I'll throw this open to the floor, but it's specific to making work lives more enjoyable, more fun. Why do you think, the question is, why do you think brands are failing to make buyers' work lives more enjoyable and fun? Is this possible in the B2B sector the same as in the B2C sector?
I definitely think it's possible. I think we're in the middle of a pretty significant transformation, and we're really putting the customer at the center of everything we're doing, and we're trying to understand exactly what they need. So things like, make it easy for me to do business with you, make it frictionless for me to engage with you, help me find exactly what I need in terms of content or information at this stage of the decision-making journey. I think B2B marketers are pivoting to build those capabilities into their digital ecosystem. So, whether it's a virtual assistant or a chatbot or some AI-assisted content delivery or an intelligently mapped journey or the integration of live sort of scripting into a call center coming from information that's being gleaned from .com interactions. So there's a lot of work required to calibrate the customer experience to make it better. And I think that work is underway, and different clients and different organizations are at different stages of that journey, but they're all on it. They're on a journey towards greater personalization, greater customization, more convenient engagement, more frictionless engagement. And if they're not on it, then they will be beaten by competitors that are.
Yeah. Here's more maybe for you, Oliver. You've introduced us to the 4 superpowers that really make a difference to the experience that customers are looking for from brands. With limited resources, if you had to say which makes the most difference, which superpower, would you say you'd focus on a company level superpower, or would it be on the buyer level superpower?
I quite understand. I'm not sure you could kind of boil it down to either of those 2 things. I mean, I think one of the key insights of the work that we've done here is that you can't just play in one of these domains, one of these areas. You have to be working across both of them. But what I hope the framework has given people a sense of is the fact that within each of those broad categories, there may be some specific things that make more of a difference within your category or for your target buyer, but also where brands are either underperforming in general or where individual brands are underperforming relative to the category. What I would say, though, is that in general, what we found is that many of the areas of underperformance tend to be within the area of understanding. So it is still the case that lots of B2B organizations do not sufficiently understand the basic requirements of the organization, who it is that they should be dealing with, what are the capabilities that they need to be offering those organizations. You'll recall that a lot of those issues prior in the presentation were in yellow, so there's clear average performance that could be improved there. But there's also just lots and lots of opportunities for enrichment. I think what I would perhaps express as being a more general value exchange between B2B brands and their customer bases. So that's all of the sorts of ways in which we have just explained in terms of making people's work lives easier. Enrichment is a funny term because it makes it sound as if there's some kind of brilliant self-actualizing experience that people are going to have here. And actually, a lot of the time, enrichment is about fixing problems, about making the path smoother for people, whether that's in terms of them selling within their organization. Big enterprise-sized organizations have, I guess, an internal purchase process, and lots of B2B brands do not make that easy at the moment. So it's perhaps those middle two areas that cut across both the buyer level and the company level that in general is where B2B brands underperform. But I would emphasize that it's very different depending on which category you look in and which target audience you're seeking to target.
I think that's important to stress, is without giving away where we're going after this in terms of kind of follow-up webinars for individual verticals, the patterns were very different. And it was that blend of the company level and that blend of the buyer level which made the real difference between the brands that made it all the way to the end and the brands that didn't. And it's getting that blend right across the journey that's quite critical. But Oliver's actually right. The underperformance tended to be those kind of more human characteristics. We're still very good at the reliability job, basically.
I mean, in some respects, if you think about the change in B2B marketing in general, there's still a lot of B2B marketing that's almost treating it as you're selling to a company. It's like a building that's buying services or products from it, as opposed to a set of individuals that have, expectations and goals and ambitions and desires. And as we get the ability to use data and technology to better understand the underlying drivers with pieces of research like this, then we have to pivot our thinking from, how do I sell to the individual? How do I connect with that person in their role within the context of that decision-making unit and forget about selling to the business? Because those days are gone, where we're selling to human beings with human goals and aspirations. And we truly, the better we understand them and then use data and technology to connect with them, the more satisfied they'll be, the more NPS they'll give us, the more business they'll give us over time.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to one of your first points, Michael, that you mentioned, is this merging of B2C and B2B markets and this personalization. It's always been a people business, the B2B world, and we can do more now with technology, but we can definitely add lots of value because as you were presenting, Simon, lots of orange and lots of red that we can help brands to do things differently there. I think building on that.
Interesting about this, Nick, just to add, things interesting about this. That last slide that I presented, we took that into a workshop with a client a couple of weeks ago, and it gave them a huge amount of confidence about areas they could focus on. And some of those, what you might have previously deemed more frivolous areas, you could show it was important on a journey, and you could show where this at versus the category. So getting a degree of confidence about actually taking more risks and doing more interesting things, which is talking to the human, basically.
Yeah. I think specific to those differences, one question, people seem to be looking at the specifics. Maybe to you, Simon, why do millennials and baby boomers report these low scores in the preeminence category, but not necessarily the Gen Xers? And I suppose that, again, it's playing to different age groups, different requirements, different needs that we need to understand in the marketplace.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that one is there were 6 characteristics in that space, and the 2 that we do well in that middle tier that we talked about were the ones that were largely about innovation. The ones where the industry does less well in were very much about obligations towards society and purpose. So despite everything that's been said about purpose historically in the last couple of years, B2B brands are still yet to crack that kind of stuff. You get to show the kind of the richer dimension of what they do as businesses, their obligations to things like, for example, stakeholders, beyond pure innovation. So yeah, different characteristics were chosen, and we're good at better innovation, not so good at those social things, which, as we all know, are increasingly becoming important.
This is such an important point, Nick. We're moving not only in a technology and data-driven transformation, but also in a generational shift. So as millennials and Gen Zs become primary influences in the B2B decision-making process, and in many industries they are, so the largest buying cohort, they're going to bring that set of values expectations with them. So they want to do business with businesses that are aligned with their values, that you know, they can connect with. So whether it's on social impact, whether it's on diversity, whether it's on sustainability, these messages are going to become more and more important. And the impact that you can have on society as a business, that's going to be taken into account as part of the decision-making process. So I do think that we have to really start sort of paying attention to the traditionally softer elements of the marketing sort of continuum and understand that these are becoming more and more important in the decision-making process.
Yeah. There's one question come in saying, any insights specifically for the B2B tech and data industry? Because I know we've talked of the 4 industry verticals, and then obviously what sits underneath technology is wide and varied. Simon, I know you've had a look at that for various clients of ours. So I think we can start to break some of these industry verticals down, can't we? To have a look at, for example, telecoms in there and where that sits within technology.
Yeah, we certainly can, and I think there are some very clear differences. I'd encourage whoever asked the question to kind of get in touch with us. We can talk to them specifically about the technology space. We are going to do a webinar on that with very specific information and detail about it. So I think that'll better help understand. But yeah, there are very clear differences there. All we really wanted to do today was touch the surface and show the potential of the different ways this can be cut and the different insights that it can generate.
Yeah, and I suppose that's a question I'm interested in knowing more detail about, specific ingredients that sit behind the main superpowers. Obviously, we've shared some with you today. I suppose that probably brings us to a nice closer to say, as Simon's mentioned there, hopefully we've given you a feel for the broader perspective of what this research can deliver. There's so much detail that sits behind it. We can mine into it to look at category specifics. We can look at it by company size, by age range. But if you're wanting to know more, then obviously our contact details are on the screen now. So do please drop us an email, get in touch. And as I said, we'll be sending all of you the recording of this with chances to sign up to the upcoming webinars in February that are sector specific, and other papers will be launched in the new year that's looking at those generational differences. So hopefully if you're interested, then we can pick up the conversation and have a look at those specifically too. But all that comes is to say that thank you for joining us today. We hope you found it interesting, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all.